Good day. My name is Edmund Mudibo. On the Living Legends tonight, we hear from a man who left teaching to pursue further education, then joined the public service. At age 36, he was a permanent secretary in the independence government and helped shape Kenya's economic path. He left the public service to venture into business. He was a minister for labor and later was at the heart of the NARC campaign in the year 2002. On the Living Legends, we speak to Honourable Titus Mbathi. Karibu sana Mzee Mbathi.
Thank you very much.
I'm so glad you could find time to join us and share your story with us and the nation at large. Karibu sana.
Well, I'm very grateful to KBC for inviting me to participate on this program on Living Legends. It's an honor, really, and I will have quite a few things to tell you.
I'm looking forward, and I'm privileged to, what they say, front row seat, as it were. So tell us about your early life and education.
My early life, I think, is very interesting. I was born at a place known as Kisekine, Mulango, Kitui County, on the 3rd of December, 1928. You'll ask me how I'm so precise about the date. It's because my father was educated. His story is very interesting. I'll tell you a bit about it. Anyway, he recorded dates of birth, baptism, marriage, etc. of all his children. We were 13 of us, and believe it or not, I was the 7th and the only one living today. All my siblings are no more. So, at an early age, my father never went to school, although I said he was literate. How did he come to get educated? It is by sheer accident, I must say, or by God's grace, because at the place where he was born, known as Vor location, people are still non-Christians, most people in that area. But we suffer from a cycle of famine every 10 years, more or less. And about 1895 or thereabouts, he was a teenager, about 12, he joined other people from the area to go to the coast looking for foodstuffs in exchange for articrafts and so on. The Akaba are very good at producing articrafts, you know. So after traveling for about 2 weeks, they got to Rabai. You know where Rabai is?
Yes.
In Kwale, not in Kwale, in northern Mombasa. And they were famished, really, having exhausted all their food supplies, eaten every animal they could hunt, until eventually they were roasting skins, which they were sleeping on, to chew, to get the feeling of swallowing something. So when they were famished, through the glades, they saw some lights and saw some boys of their age. Lo and behold, it was a missionary station. Lutheran mission at Rabai. That's where he became a Christian. You know, the boys were taught literacy and catechism and baptized. Then he was educated by the missionaries. He never went to any formal school. And being a bright boy, believe it or not, he ended up, the missionaries moved from Rabai to Ukambani. Ikuda first, a place known as Ikuda, about 100 kilometers from Kitui town. And from there, they went to Mulango, where we come from. There he bought some land, and I was the first child to be born there. So by sheer coincidence, I am first in many ways. So I went to a missionary school. AIM, whenever the missionaries establish a station, they establish three things. First, a church. Secondly, a school, and then a dispensary. So that is the school I went to. And my early education, what was important, very important in my early education was two things: discipline and moral values. We were taught moral values and discipline. These were very important at that time. They still remain today. And those have remained as the hallmarks of my personality and integrity since then.
And you missed out on a place in Makerere University because of subject combination. What is it that Makerere wanted and, you know, caused you to miss out on that as an opportunity?
Actually, after thinking deeply about those days, you know, I'm talking about 1947, it's not yesterday. What I realized was that my original story was not completely correct. What happened was that there was another exam known as the Makerere College Entrance Examination. So obviously I did not do very well at that. Although I had a first division with Cambridge School Certificate, I did not qualify to go to Makerere. That's why I didn't go there. And this was a devastation to me because it was the only source of higher education to which I was committed from a young age. I really felt a great desire to get higher education. So when I failed to go to Makerere, I felt that my life was ruined. But lo and behold, God had other plans for me, which I will explain to you.
Yes. And you trained as a teacher, then quit to pursue university education in India.
Exactly.
How did this opportunity come your way?
I'll tell you how this happened. Having failed to go to Makerere, I wanted to get employment. And there were many vacancies at that time. Even with a school certificate, in fact, you would get a very good job because educated people are not half as many as they are today. So my father advised me not to take a job because he was certain that if I got a job, I would hardly pursue my education. So he advised me to go into teaching. And I went to Kagumo Teacher Training College, which I must say was very good.
Yes.
Trained for 1 year instead of 2 years, and then taught for 1 year also at Machakos, 1.5 years at Machakos High School. And believe it or not, do you know what my subjects were? English and mathematics.
Wow.
Even with the Cambridge School Certificate, I was teaching high school students maths and English. But much as I loved teaching, my mind was set on higher education. I tried to get a scholarship to Britain. I was advised by our principal at Machakos, one Mr. Crawford, to teach for a few more years in order to get a scholarship to Britain. But I was impatient. And in that mood, I came to know that the government of India was offering full scholarship to students to go and study in India. I applied for one, got interviewed, and got a scholarship to go and study economics in India. I went to Madras University where I spent 5 years and got an honors degree. That's how I came to go to India.
Interesting. So you still fasted for education and more and higher and...
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. From a young age, I was determined to get higher education. It really appears to me. It became an obsession, as a matter of fact. And God opened opportunities for me. Because after coming back, I joined the civil service as a community development officer. Was posted to my own district, Kitui. And after working for 2.5 years, I got to know that there were Fulbright scholarships being offered to students from Kenya and other places. Highly competitive, but I got one, which enabled me to go to the United States to study for a master's degree. That's how it happened.
And it's no wonder that you are appointed a permanent secretary, and then, like as you've indicated, as first as the director of personnel management, and then as economic development PS in Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's independence government. Tell us about these roles and how they changed the face of Kenya.
You know, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was a true patriot. He wanted nothing but the best for Kenya. And he was very selective in appointing civil servants to senior positions. And we, being the first Africans to replace expatriates, were committed to not failing our president. We loved the president because we valued what he had done. My generation knows what it means to be free. Because during the colonial times, for example, as civil servants, we were paid much less than the colonialists doing the same kind of jobs. Why? Just because we were British subjects, not citizens.
Subjects.
Subjects. And that has great significance, you know. During those days, discrimination was the standard practice. With your black skin, however educated you might be, however wealthy you might be, you would not be admitted into schools which you and my son, for example, went to Lenana. They were known as Prince of Wales, Duke of York, Duke of Gloucester, etc. As an African, you couldn't study in those schools at all. As an African, you could not go to high-class hotels, the Stanley, the Norfolk, etc. However senior you might be, however wealthy you might be, just because you are an African and a British subjects. Thirdly, there were areas which were meant exclusively for Europeans. And you couldn't buy land there, you couldn't live there. You were to live in what they call the designated areas like Kariakor, Starehe, etc. Those were meant for the Africans. So we knew what colonialism meant, and we were determined to uphold the standards set by expatriates and even surpass them. That is why, as the first director of personnel management and others who are permanent secretaries and senior civil servants, we would even work on Sundays. You know why? To make sure that our desks were clean on Mondays. We wanted to do as well and even surpass the standards set by expatriates, because we didn't want to let our president down. When appointing us, Kenyatta would say, I appoint you to this senior position, you are the first African to occupy it, but I want you to remember one thing. If you don't succeed, I will sack you.
He was very clear.
Very clear as to what he expected of us.
Yes.
So that made us work even harder. But we liked him for one thing. He respected other people. As a president, when we went to see him, he made us feel important and that we mattered in government. So he would ask us, are you comfortable? Is there anything more that the government can do for you? It was like a father figure, you know. So we didn't want to let him down, and we were determined not to. And sure enough, we succeeded.
Now, during your tenure at the Treasury, there was the famous sessional paper number 10 of 1965. Looking at it then briefly and looking at the country today, with devolution now in place, how do the proposed development models compare or contrast?
Because at that time, there was, which you probably know, the provincial administration. That's how the country was divided into 7 provinces, actually. And each province had districts. Each district had locations. Each location had sub-locations. That was the structure as it was at that time. So development was channeled through provinces and districts and locations, etc. The idea of devolution did not occur at all at that time. Sessional paper number 10, by the way, was authored by the Ministry of Economic Development and Economic Planning and Development. And guess who the chief officers were? Tom Mboya was our minister. Mwai Kibaki was the assistant minister. And yours faithfully, myself,
Yes.
I was the permanent secretary. So we were ex-Mangut boys. And we had a wonderful time. Sessional paper number 10 defined functions which would be undertaken by the central government, functions which would be done by the parastatals, and the functions which should be done by the private sector. That was the foundation, really, of real development in the country. And that paper was the guide in government planning for years. So the idea of devolution came very much later, and I must say it's a wonderful idea. Why? Because the bulk of Kenya population lives in the rural areas, as you know. Previously, they were governed indirectly because decisions were made at the central government and then handed over to provincial commissioners, district commissioners, etc. Counties were non-existent. They were known as districts, locations, etc. But they were only applying decisions or implementing decisions which had been made by the central government. With the devolution, each county has got a lot of authority, really, and there are huge resources channeled through counties. When I was a community development officer, for example, my allocation was very small. And so, although the work we were doing was appreciated, we had very little resources to implement projects which we had. Whereas today, an MP who is serious can do a lot for his constituency. When I was, eventually, as we will come to this, when I was a minister or a member of parliament, we did not have any constituency development funds. And Wananchi being what they are, they would come to me with requests, which I found difficult to turn down, for funeral expenses, school fees, hospital bills, etc. And not having any money from the government to dish out to them, I had to use my own salary. So to be honest with you, most times I was in the red. Not because I was not paid, but because I loved my constituents. I still love them.
Yes.
But I had no means to service them or to satisfy them, much as I would have liked to. Whereas today, a constituency gets billions every year. An MP who is really committed to development
Can make that difference at the
can
grassroots.
make a big difference, But regrettably,
Yes.
most of them don't think in terms of the constituency. They think in terms of what they can pinch from what is meant for the constituency.
Now, as you progress on, you quit the civil service to get into private business. How was it viewed, the challenges that you may have faced getting into business in that environment that was heavily regulated in terms of foreign exchange, transactions, price controls, and even in some instances, monopoly, just very briefly?
What made me get into the private sector was two factors. One, we had reached the peak in the civil service, as I told you, what we call the super scale. However long you worked, there would be no increments in salary. That's what was called
the super scale, yes.
Super scale. Super scale. Once you get the super scale, the salary was fixed at 2,800 pounds per annum. No more. Even translated today, taking inflation into consideration, that was a very small amount compared to what civil servants get today. But I'll tell you something very interesting. Cases of corruption were almost nil. Today, with civil servants earning several times what we earned, look at the level of corruption. Anyway, what pulled me into the private sector was that I had reached the peak, but the private sector was looking for people of our caliber. The first two people to invoke the super scale allowance, that is when you retired at the age of 40 or had worked for 10 years, first one to invoke that was Kenneth Matiba, who joined the breweries. I was the second who joined an international company as their regional representative. So it's not that we were fed up with the civil service, it was that we found greener pastures. But for me in particular, I joined an air shipping agency, joining hands with a British company known as Air Shipping Agencies. So the question of exchange control was not inhibitive to us because goods were paid for from the United Kingdom, and all that we had to do here was what we call break bulking. That is clearing and forwarding to various destinations. So we did not feel the crunch of exchange control. But I can assure you that for people who are to import from here, that was a real crunch. And everybody was relieved when exchange control was removed.
Now you were elected into politics and of course appointed Labour Minister by Mzee Moi, but it ended with an interesting fallout during a public pronouncement that caught you off guard. Very quickly, what was that situation?
I want to explain to you that unlike Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, President Moi's style of government was very different. I think you must have heard about people being sacked through the radio.
Yes, we did, in the station here.
Because he did not have much respect for officials. So in my case, we were invited to a wedding of General Mulinge's son at Stony Athi. The president was a guest of honor. There were several ministers, including me, and the head of the public service was there too. So after making his remarks, congratulating the bride and bridegroom, the president, out of the blue, ended up his remarks by saying, by the way, there are two trade unions which are not working in the interests of the government. They are the University Staff Union and Civil Servants Union. These two are not working in the interests of the government, and therefore they are deregistered with immediate effect. So I turned to my colleague, the chief of the civil service, the head of the civil service, Jeremiah Kerene, and asked him, Jeremiah, why did you not tell me, being the Minister for Labour, about this? He said, I didn't know anything about it either. So I told him, I'm going to discuss it with the president. I meant very well, because as a Minister for Labour, I regarded advising the president as my chief
responsibility,
work, really.
Yes.
Yeah, chief responsibility. So, to cut a long story short, when I met the president, told him, Your Excellency, I didn't know anything about this, and anyway, as you are Minister for Labour, I should draw your attention to the fact that the unions should have been consulted to give their, viewpoint. So he said, no, don't you know that we are a sovereign nation and can do what we want? I said, yes, sir, but there are certain protocols, international protocols, to which we are signatories and we should respect them. Then he looked at me and said, no, we are sovereign, we can do whatever we want. And then he asked me, are you the same person I appointed minister? So I knew that my goose was cooked. And from then, yes, our relationship soured until eventually he made sure, as you know, during those days of KANU, the government had had people who are earmarked to become MPs in certain areas. And I happened to be a sufferer because I was told plainly, you know, in government, of course, you have your informers, so plainly you are not in favor of the government, so don't waste your time and money campaigning. But I was hard-hearted, head-headed, you know. I tried twice, failed, and gave it up.
Now, your appointment post-2003 was board chairman of the power purchase producer KenGen, and you know, were instrumental in the transformation of the institution from being 100% owned parastatal to a listed firm at the NSC. What are some key lessons?
Well, I'll tell you about that. That's very interesting. You know, after leaving government, I went into my own business and so on. And when multipartyism was introduced, I became a very active member and district chairman for Kitui. So much so that I played an important part in government. So, to begin with, I was in Ford with Matiba's section until he became ill. So I joined the Ford major, and when the opportunity came, I joined Kibaki with his party, and I grew very close to him because since school days we had been very, very close. So Kibaki appointed me as the Director General of NARC, which eventually took over the government in 2002, you see. And it was after that election, when Kibaki came to power, he appointed me as chairman of KenGen. And at KenGen, I worked with someone with whom we were in sync, that is Eric Jeroge as the managing director, and I was chairman. And among the reforms we introduced in KenGen was that the company should not continue to be owned by the government alone. So we persuaded the government to have an IPO, initial public offer of some shares, in order to broaden the base of the company and financing. That IPO was so popular that it was oversubscribed several times. And it is what really opened the door for investing in shares and stocks. And since then, this has become a very important avenue for financing and growing our economy.
Wonderful, and I'm very pleased you penned an autobiography which I have here in my hand, My Life's Journey, an autobiography. What inspired you to put your memoirs in published form?
What inspired me was two things. One, the experiences I explained to you, particularly going through colonialism, being in the first government, seeing the Union Jack lowered and the Kenyan flag raised, at which, by the way, we all shed tears. It was a wonderful experience to know that you are no longer a British subject, but a Kenyan citizen. You just found tears flowing.
It was very emotional.
Oh, very, very emotional. We danced throughout the night. And on account of that, what was the question?
In terms of what the inspiration that got you to
to write down my memoirs.
Yes.
It's because, one, my generation is an endangered species. We are disappearing, one after another, and our experiences, unless put in writing, as I have done, will tend not to be remembered. But when they are in a written form like this, they will be remembered. Two, I have made some very positive suggestions for students and matured people alike. For students, I have stated that hard work is essential. If someone tells you, I don't study, but I get top marks, that is a lie, because he could have done better. If he is doing well without studying hard, it shows that after studying harder, he can do better. 2, discipline. During our days, you would never hear of a school building being burned by students. Never, ever. Today, it's common knowledge that many dormitories have been burned and even lives lost by fires lit by students. Students destroying their own property, as it were, because their dormitories are theirs, really, aren't they? And it's not the students who pay for the damages. It's the parents like you and me and others, you see. So that hurts people of our generation. And it's important for people to know, after reading a book like this, that during our days, discipline was topmost in schools. As a result of which, students were disciplined, and I believe disciplined students will become disciplined citizens for the better of the country. If indiscipline spreads out, as we have seen it doing, you see people, take the Mombasa Highway, for example, Mombasa Road, for example, you are driving on the left-hand side, as you are supposed to, and a lorry veers off the road from the other direction, coming straight at you. There have been many collisions, as you know, lives lost, etc. Why? Because of indiscipline. These are only examples, you know.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Unless you have a disciplined society, as a country, you cannot go very far.
Now, I know this because we attend the same church.
Yes.
How has your faith, very briefly, contributed to your life's journey?
My faith has shaped my life. Because when I look back, for example, when I had given up hope of higher education, opportunities opened, totally and completely unexpectedly. Number 2, when appointments were being made, you know, the civil service initially was inclined towards people who had studied in the UK to be promoted. I got appointed ahead of some of my colleagues who had gone to the UK. These are God's opportunities, and God opened opportunities for me to do well in business and so on. I did not tell you that in the course of my life, I married an African American. That was God's choice also, because she was a highly spiritual lady, and she helped not only to shape the life of others, but to encourage me in my faith. So when I look at these pictures, I say, God is the one who has led me to be where I am today, to be 94 plus, when most of my colleagues have disappeared. It's only by God's grace that I have attained these mercies, you know. And this has strengthened my faith. Where it was weak, it's very strong today, and I can stand on housetops, honestly, and say, I am a saved Christian.
Amen.
And I believe in God without any hesitation, because I know it is true. What is said in the Bible is absolutely true, and I would advocate it to others.
And indeed, Mzee Mbathi, we celebrate you as a living legend.
Thank you.
Parting short in under 10 seconds, what would be your message to those leading the country now?
My message to those leading the country now is this: our country is greater than any one individual. In Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes, verse 9, it is written, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." That's a very deep statement, isn't it? So I would say, for the sake of our country, let us first acknowledge Ruto as the elected president of our country. 2, it is easy to destroy a country, but to rebuild it takes years or can become impossible. Look at our neighbors, look at Somalia, etc. So I would appeal to our leaders in the interest of our country to agree to dialogue, because with goodwill, any problem can be resolved with goodwill. Without goodwill, even the simplest of problems will become impossible to solve. So that would be my message to our leaders. Please, in the interest of our country, stick to dialogue genuinely, because without goodwill, you cannot resolve the problems. With goodwill, you can resolve our problems. Our country has got what it takes to grow, to become a tiger in this part of the world. For us to be very proud of it as we are, let us not destroy the good country which God has given us. Let us put aside selfish interests and the interests of the country, agree to dialogue genuinely, and then resolve the existing problems. And I'm sure God will open the way for us to live in peace with one another.
Asante sana, Mbathi. How time flies, like we say. My life's journey and autobiography, you've inspired me. I think I have a story to tell. And yes, it has been a pleasure speaking to the Honourable Titus Mbathi on the living legends. He was the chair of the KenGen board when it went public. Had a tiff with former President Moi over the deregistration of unions, and was a permanent secretary in Kenya's first administration. Thank you very much, Honourable Mbathi, for being our guest this evening. Thank you for being in this show, and thank you too for watching this edition of Living Legends. My name is Mbathi.
Thank you very much.